What are the problems in the future? Lots of the problems in the 21st century get solved in the back half of the 21st century. So if you're watching this in the early 2020s or 30s, many of the most urgent pressing issues of humanity will have been addressed by the 2120s, but other different, interesting problems still exist. So let's dive in and ask, what are the problems in the future? Basket one is a problem set that you still have in the early 21st century, and you have had for several hundred, if not 1,000 years. It gets a little fuzzy. Countries, nation states are still an issue of tension. So political tensions are still a thing in the 2120s. We still have national divisions. We've got Canada and Mexico and the United States having some tension. There's still tension in Europe on the eastern edge. Africa has undergone some consolidation, but there are tensions there, as well as questions of developmental access, who has it, who doesn't. Then there's a whole set of micronations which are new on the scene by the 2120s, which don't yet quite exist in the 2020s, but they're a gleam in your eye. You're starting to think about network states that you can leave other states and join, and groups of like-minded people will self-assemble these organizations, and that will become a larger, more politically significant phenomenon over the course of the 21st century. And in the 22nd century, it's an issue. It's on the map of geopolitics. They're not especially militarily significant, but they are relevant with regards to military issues because somebody needs to defend them. Nations can try and impose their wills on these independent islands and flying communities and other sorts of variations, and they want their own representation. Of course, the question of how many people do you have to be a country at the United Nations, say, becomes relevant, and these countries in some cases have squabbles among and between each other. Then there's also the question of space. Nations expand into space in the early 21st century, first half, say, and for a while there's a sort of national representation on the moon and on Mars and out in space. But after a while, you start to get your own identity in these places, and these Martian and lunar colonies, and to some extent, some of the floating colonies that are heading to other places by the end of the century. In some of the Jovian moons, for example, the Jovian system is pretty far away from Earth, and it starts to feel a little weird to call something American if it's on, Europa. So there are some tensions in the 2120s as some of these national organizations break away or recombine, and power centers have been shifting into space over the course of this time. We'll return to that point at the end. So that's basket one, is nations. There are still political tensions. You might be surprised in the 2120s how much tension there still is, for example, between America and Mexico, because the Mexican diaspora has expanded into Texas in the intervening time, and there's a large amount of overlap of populations in both areas. So there's just a source of political tension there, whether either country would like for there to be or not. Moving on to the second interesting category, divergence is not a problem exactly, but a source of tension throughout the world in the 2120s. Over the course of the 21st century, multiple kinds of transhumanism blossom and bloom and flutter off into space or into new, vibrant, flaming, excited communities. These include things like uploaded minds, cyborg development, and bioediting. These are just three versions, but of course there are millions of little niches where people kind of choose to change their bodies in a particular way. And some of these groups identify themselves as distinct from other communities, and some of them think of themselves as part of a larger transhumanist project. But the point is, there are divisions between these groups, and there are divisions between all the transhuman minds and sort of what you would call garden variety, classic edition, original flavor humans. Some of those people, like the Amish, especially the Amish, will choose to not put nanobots in their body and not gradually upload copies of themselves to the cloud, and not copy those copies and copy those copies and copy those copies, so that there will be trillions of minds in the clouds. And some of those people will choose to opt out of the stem cell technology and age rejuvenation therapies that are very available to more transhumanistically inclined explorers and endeavorers. So there are lots of groups there. You can easily imagine how there might be tension in between these groups, and that phenomena overlaps with the national phenomenon, because some of these groups will choose identities in a state. Like in the X-Men, there was that sort of nation just for superpowered people, and versions of things like that will be happening in the 2120s and are happening in the time when I'm from. Finally, superintelligence. The last big basket is going to loop us around and sort of remind us of countries, because superintelligence is so powerful that it might as well be like nations. Sort of like if one person were an entire country. So in the end of the 21st century, humanity will be sharing Earth and the sky with many other beings that are individually each as powerful as, like, classic edition human gods. And those beings sometimes will exist in tension with each other, and sometimes they will exist in tension with the human populations of Earth and space. So, that's a little bit dicey, not because anybody wants to hurt anybody necessarily, but just because power balances tend to make all creatures a little uneasy. And as one group starts to accumulate the abilities to theoretically wipe out another group with, say, like a mass biological weapon, or even just whipping rocks at a planet, or launching nukes, or whatever, other parts of the body politic, the body geopolitic, the body spatiopolitic will get nervous and want to up their abilities as well so that they can compete. Now that means a lot of these power centers are going to be based in space, because on Earth it's just really hot politically. It's like very tense if an AI wants to set up shop, and some of them do in the 21st century. It will be under the very watchful and frankly very worried eyes of humanity, which of course will also be recruiting its own super intelligent tools, and many of these humans who are in charge by the latter half of the 21st century will have been uplifted into their transhuman state. So you're not talking about original flavor humans versus superintelligence. You're talking about augmented now superhumans versus superintelligence. And again, I don't want to suggest that it's war. It's just that there's a natural kind of state of tension, of high charged atmosphere in between all these different power centers. And that means that although there are some on Earth, many more of these AI choose to leave, and they want to be out where they can be free, independent, have access to resources and power and materials on their own without human interference. And that means they are going to be in the Jovian system. They're going to be around the sun. They're going to be around the other planetary bodies. And some of them are going to be heading out into the Kuiper Belt and well off into the Oort cloud. They'll be moving a lot faster than the Voyager and Voyager 2, which in the 2020s are the furthest things from Earth. And they are going to eventually lap those things. And by the 2120s, some of them are very far out indeed. So you've got like fleets of superintelligence, some of which have gone in multiple directions and are keeping in touch with each other via networked intelligence. And so those organisms are not exactly at conflict, in states of conflict with humanity, but they are politically situated to compete with humanity were such a competition to heat up. So that makes things more complicated. And I'll just add as a coda here that in the 2120s, we are aware of more alien life than you are in the 2020s. And we're in communication with the ones who came to Earth. But I didn't put it on the problems list because they're quite far away still. And even in the 2120s, we haven't gotten to the point where we're interacting with most of them directly. And even communication takes a long, long time because faster than light travel is still a bit of a physics sticking point, even for us super future-y people. We can do little things with wormholes, which we'll talk about another time. So that's to say, even though 100 years in the future is still very far and very advanced compared to, say, the 2020s, it's not the end of history. In many ways, it's an exciting beginning. Hope you had fun. See you in the future. Control conflict in your own life, especially with yourself.